Hey, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Adam?
I'm good. How about you, David?
Doing all right, doing all right.
Can
How's
you
the day
see
been?
me or hear me?
What?
Can you see me at all or
Not yet.
not yet?
Not yet.
Let's see. All right, I think I got it.
Hey, let's
Beautiful.
go.
How's it going, man?
Going good. Going good. Sorry, I don't remember if I asked if a Zoom wouldn't work.
You most likely did, and I just like didn't. I spaced on the. I looked on the calendar and I was like, oh, it says Zoom. I should probably get that.
I'm dying. Does it still work for you just fine or
Yeah, yeah, everything's good. Yeah, everything's all good.
let's go.
Just had to take this in like the car in the parking lot because we have a full cafe and the patios full as well, and then we have road construction in the front, so it's just kind of loud and everything. This is like my only quiet space. So
Well, I love it. Man, thanks so much for jumping on this call. Man, I got to taste all the coffees this morning, hence why I was like,
great.
give me a little more time to dial in some of them. But just so exciting. Very excited to talk about all these coffees. But just to begin with, kind of tell us about a little, about you and Reprise. Again, when I told people that this was going to be a roastery for August subscription that is out of like Chicago/Evanston, they were like, "What?" Like, bro, it's
A
just too
local.
neat. Yeah, yeah. So kind of just give us the whole backstory of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, to make kind of a long story short, we started in 2015. We are a startup from scratch, so we started on some bartending and barista money that I worked pretty hard for to get. Moved back home with my parents, and to start a little train station cafe that was like maybe 50 square foot. It was really small, and we've been improving on that since then. We're now at our like ninth year of business, and we have two full line cafes and another cafe inside of Northwestern University, which is here in Evanston. And yeah, we're looking to eventually move our whole operation to Evanston to just fully be immersed in the community because our main focus is coffee education. And we found a home here in Evanston. I live here, and me and my wife work together. My business partner also is a coffee farmer in Matagalpa, Nicaragua, and so we're trying to build our whole sourcing off of relationships and authentic buying practices. So probably jumped around a bunch there, but so much has happened that it's just hard to say in a sentence, or a
Yeah.
few sentences even.
Well, to kind of break that down a little bit, I don't remember. Are you from Evanston and or Illinois as a whole, or not even?
Well, I grew up in Los Angeles, but my family moved out of there when I was 12 or 13. And so I've mostly been in Chicago the rest my whole life. I want to say my parents now live in Montana and everybody's dispersed. So I could say I guess I'm from here now. I don't know. It's such a complicated question to ask because I wouldn't say I'm necessarily from California either.
Yeah, yeah. Man, I gotta say it's awesome. Your parents live in Montana. Where in Montana do they live?
Whitefish, do you know
Oh,
what that is? Yeah.
yeah.
It's the people that know it's either like, no, I've never heard of that, or like, oh yeah, that's an amazing, like cool
Yep.
town.
Yeah, that's the place. I've actually almost, I think, for like 4 or 5 years in a row. I have a friend who lives in Montana, so I'll go up every year to say hi and go hiking. And
Yeah, it's
so
amazing. Yeah, it's so true.
it's so beautiful. Oh
It's
man,
a
that's
whole other experience for sure.
tell me you visit your parents like once a year.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We're actually going in a couple of weeks to
Oh,
go and say hey and visit our friends at Monogram Coffee in Canada. They're in
Yes.
yeah, they're awesome. So we're gonna go. He's like, I never get specialty coffee people here because they're in like the middle of nowhere. So we're gonna go hang out and enjoy some coffees together.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I
Got to
have.
make it a coffee trip.
Yeah, yeah. I for the first time I got to meet the sales manager of uh Monogram. I'm forgetting her name, but I've emailed her multiple times. But she was super sweet. I got to meet her in Chicago at Expo, and they were
Awesome.
just so wonderful to chat with. And I was like, oh my gosh, one of these days I got to get up to Calgary because
Absolutely.
yeah, no, oh that's so cool. I'm crying. Yeah, yeah. So you mentioned you have a business partner who happens to be in Metagalpa in Nicaragua.
Yeah,
That's for the most part, I feel like that's kind of not normal for a
sure.
roaster in the U.S. You know, I actually don't even remember if I know the story. How did that happen? How did you meet your business partner? Was yeah, how'd that happen?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my partner's name is Ben. He owns and runs Gold Mountain Coffee Growers, and he was doing that before Reprise was even a thought. And he started a coffee farm there because when he was going to college, he wrote his thesis statement uh, on the debt part in Nicaragua years ago that the economy was so bad they were considering just starting over from scratch. And he wrote his thesis on if that would be effective or not, and came to the conclusion that it wouldn't be effective unless they raised the quality of their main export to get more money into the country instead of just rolling back into the same old thing. And so uh, a friend of his had joked about, why don't you just go buy your own coffee farm then? And so he's like, yeah, right. And then, not later that became a reality. And and he was just starting to do get involved into the SCA Expo around 2015, 2016. We were just starting out and I wanted to volunteer. I saw a film about coffee was just released around then. That's the title, a film about coffee. And it was really inspiring to me to watch that and see the social impact that coffee can have through relationships and then like actually working with other people. You know, crazy crazy things here, but radical ideas in this day and age.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I just started volunteering with him and we became friends and we had a lot of like-minded ideas. And he helped seed our company at the time to get into our first full line cafe because when we were in the train station, we had low rent, low overhead, but we're also doing low volume.
Mhm.
And we needed a way to expand at least to a place where we could serve a bigger population of the community,
Mhm.
have a sit down space, and be more of a specialty coffee environment.
Yeah. Wow. That's what a neat thing. Again, just that's not the norm that I that I find that
Yeah,
roastery in the US, you're kind of working with someone, you know, in a place such as Nicaragua and as little as I know about Ben, I've heard good things, like
yeah,
really so that's
yeah. He's
great.
he's like a brother to me. We're super close now. Like we talk like almost every day, and
Yeah.
so it's cool. And then now I work with my wife as well, who's totally a specialty coffee nerd, and that's had its own, little side adventure, and it's cool. It makes it more personal for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So you and your wife, how did you two, I mean, were you two you drank coffee growing up, or, was there like a come to Jesus moment, like in specialty coffee for you two? Like,
Well, I met my wife when I opened the train station shop. So we had just met at that time, and then she had worked for Bed Bath and Beyond in like the corporate side, and she hated it, and so she just quit her job one day and was like, "I don't have a backup plan. I just need to do this." And I was like, "All right." and then an opportunity opened up for a cafe that I was consulting with, and they needed a new manager because it wasn't working out. And so I was like, hey, do you want to? This might not be like a forever solve for you, but maybe this is something that you could get some side money, drink some coffee. You know, we could work together to capacity. She did it, loved it. She's a killer barista. She's a better barista than I am now. Like, and I got at least 6, 7, 8 years on her. So
Yeah. Wow.
but she's amazing. So she runs our cafes, like all the operations, the people side of that, and allows me to focus on roasting and the sourcing and design.
Man. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's way too much fun. It's funny that like every year that I've gone to Chicago, I've just genuinely not known about you. And so, I'm going to other places,
Yeah.
and now when people ask me like where would you go in Chicago, I now mention Reprise even though I haven't been. Like,
Yes.
like,
Yeah, and that's the thing, being such a small company with not any investors, really, we haven't had a marketing budget. It's been just like rubbing two sticks together the whole time, and we've had a lot slower of a growth, but we've been able to maintain the integrity of like what we want to achieve through our mission, and be able to keep that intact and not have to please anybody for a quick dollar, because I don't think coffee should be about a quick dollar if that's your mindset going into it. I don't know, get into real estate or something. I don't know what to say, but
yeah, yeah. No, I love it. Well, I actually don't even know, where did the name Reprise come from?
yeah, it's named after Frank Sinatra, his record label. When he was kicked out of Capitol Records, he formed Reprise Records as a reprisal to the record industry. And that later formed the Rat Pack, which is, arguably one of the best musical groups in history. And so that's what we aim to do with Reprise. Like, I felt I was fired from one of my old coffee roasting jobs for some weird political stuff, and so, that I won't get into. And so I felt, in the same way, kicked out of the coffee industry. And so I started Reprise Coffee Roasters in that same, idea, or the same headspace.
That's brilliant. Nice. That's
Yeah.
a good ode, actually. Very, very, very fitting for you. I'm sure.
Yeah, and we change the industry in our own little way. We're a small company, but we very much aim to be that reprisal of the industry and want to make it better. And so, we do what we can, even if it's just a small impact. It's the better choice, and
Yeah,
eventually these will be bigger impacts.
yeah, yeah. No, that's very exciting. Well, let's go ahead, and I just would love to dive in and talk about the four coffees that we used and just hear from you. The first one, probably, I think we should start with, is the Wilton Benitez, just one of the approachables that we used. Tell us just kind of how you came to get a hold of this coffee and a little bit about Wilton.
Amazing. Yeah, Wilton, we've been working with for a while. We're friends with his friends, if that makes sense. So now we've met him several times over the years, but we started working with him in 2016, 2017. And anaerobics were not really a thing then. They were starting to trickle out into the market, but you didn't really see a whole lot of them like you do now. And I want to say, is he was one of the uh, leaders in that fermentation process, and he's developed his own proprietary method for anaerobic fermentation called thermal shock. Really, it's temperature shocking the coffee in a way that either sparks the fermentation process or slows it down, but uses heat and temperature to manipulate that. And has a bioreactor on his coffee farm that he built and patented himself. So it's like a very scientific thing. He's got degrees, very smart individual. And so the variety that we gave you is Castillo, which is like a Colombian variety. It's very popular in Colombia. I want to say Sena Cafe developed that in like the 80s or around there, and to combat coffee leaf rust and other diseases that coffee trees were experiencing at the time. And Castillo fights through that, so it's disease resistant, high yields, pretty decent cup quality, and through Wilton's processing, he was able to even elevate that even more. So you get a really cool, complex cup of coffee, even though it's more of a well-known variety, a higher yielding variety. And in specialty coffee, we like the low yields, like the geishas and whatnot. But through processing and through, you know, genetics and careful farming and all the other factors that go into the production of coffee, you could produce a really exceptional cup quality, even with Castillo. So. Mm. You get a big chocolate body to it, just like a very classic Colombian body, a chocolate bar, and then a bunch of cool fruit notes over the top too. It's a pretty deep cup of coffee.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really neat to have a good Castillo. When I think of Castillo, to be honest, the first person or producer I think of is actually Diego Bermudez, because that was probably the first producer I had a really good Castillo from, and I was like, oh wow, and
Yeah.
so very excited that we could get a one from here. And actually, I don't even know if we've had a Castillo for our subscription yet. If we have, I've forgotten. um, but I think it's kind of neat what you said, like developed by Colombia to be a little bit more disease resistant, but it's neat to see producers like Wilton do a really good job with it, and it's so exciting. And it kind of gives us a taste of the potential, from these producers who are doing such a good job. I get very excited when it's like something, I don't know, a little different, so to speak. And so this was a really fun one to get. And yeah, the tasting notes on your bag were just like completely spot on. Like just
Right on.
totally, oh yeah. And like for me, just toasted coconut right out the gate, but in like the best way, because like you can get like almost too toasted coconut or like,
for sure.
and this was just like perfect and just mandarin orange and just like, I don't know, it just kind of filled my mouth really nicely. And I was just like very happy with it and the sweetness. And it was just, yeah, it was just really enjoyable to have like a really just solid and good coffee from Wilton. I was just like, let's go. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to that point too, it's nice to have an anaerobic. If you've never had an anaerobic before and you wanted to get introduced to it, this is the perfect coffee for that because it's not too crazy. You can't really taste the ferment. It just is incorporated really well, rounded, nice and balanced.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I absolutely loved it. It was so good. Yeah, and the next one, the Guatemala Raul Solis,
Yeah,
so good. It's also not often that we're able to get a geisha for our kind of approachable subscription, so to speak. So to get a few bags
yeah,
of it was kind of neat. And I mean, same thing. Like I wrote down basically the same notes that you had on the back,
yes.
which is always, I mean, to be honest, that's like an indication to us of like, wow, we really like this roaster. It's
Yes,
when like,
absolutely.
we're getting
Well, we
every
work
single.
really hard for that too. We and my wife both are CQI certified with the Q program for Arabica, and all of that is just being able to accurately describe coffee. That's really all it is. So.
Yeah, but no, it is just so good. I wrote down, on top of the fig and I forget the other notes. I wrote down blackberry, like a juicy prune, tangerine
Yeah,
finish, just super enjoyable and a little bit more complex, but not as floral as I would assume a geisha to be. But it was just
absolutely.
really, really, really nice. And I actually don't know if I've had coffee from this producer before. How'd you come across Raul?
You haven't had coffee from this producer because this is the first time it's been in the US or out for export at all.
No.
And how we got our hands on it is because it's actually family coffee. So my wife's cousin produced that coffee, Raul. We're
Okay.
going to visit him in October of this year and going to be visiting the farm and hopefully tasting and checking out some cool stuff that they have for upcoming harvest. But yeah, he's so to make an even long story short, it's going to be hard to condense this one because it goes back a little bit. But if you wanted to hear the full story, it's on our website. If you want to check out the bio of that coffee, it's maybe, I don't know, a page or two long of storytelling. But so that's my wife's cousin, and years ago, her aunt Thelma, who is a proprietor of the coffee farm in Guatemala. And I don't know if I even said this, but my wife was born and raised in Guatemala. She moved out when she was about 8 to come to the U.S., and her family has been here ever since. So um, just to tell a little bit of the backstory on that. So her aunt Thelma passed away a few years ago, and divvied up her farm to her children. Raul being one of them, and there's a couple others. I am spacing on their names at the moment. And Raul was the only one that decided to do specialty coffee, whereas it was a commodity market farm before a big production farm, and so they didn't do anything specialty. Um, Anna Cafe, which is like the government entity for Guatemala, commissioned them because they were the first farm in Esquipulas as well. You don't see a whole lot of coffee come out of this region either, which is even more special. Like you see like a lot of Antigua, Atitlan, and things like that. Esquipulas is a really cool area, and he took the highest elevation part of his farm. They develop also fertilizers and things. Their family, and so they developed their own fertilizers and planted them under the banana trees for shade grow, and also bananas give extra nutrients to the coffee plants. And so um, he grew this geisha and submitted it to the Ana Cafe competition for Guatemalan coffees and won third place with it. And it was more of just to prove to himself that they could grow amazing coffee. And this was the first harvest that you're tasting. So it's 150 pounds, and that was it. And we've already contracted for next year, hopefully a 500-ish pound harvest, and hopefully some other varieties on the horizon too. So like true direct trade coffee comes, from family owned farm, and then we get it right now FedEx to us. Like we haven't figured out how we're going to bring it into the US next year, but that's the exciting part of what we do. So
Yeah. Wow, that's wild. Really neat to now know that it's the first of
mhm.
so many more to come. That's crazy that this is like the first and it's so good. Like,
Yeah, yeah, I
like
know. We were like, wait, what? Like, because when me and my wife met, I asked them about coffee because they said that they have farms in Guatemala that they grow coffee. It's like, oh, and they're like, oh, like not that kind of coffee. And then we're like, okay, like fair enough. And so just kind of like left it alone. And when SCA was in Chicago, we connected with one of Kati's family members was coming to showcase the geisha and some pacamara and some other things that they had in their farms. So we got to meet him and talk, and they're like, "Oh yeah, you should try this." And we're like, "Okay." And we were just like, "Let's buy it. It's 100 pounds or whatever. Not a big deal. If it's not super amazing, the story alone and just supporting her family is enough reason to purchase it."
Mhm.
And so yeah,
Wow, what a fun time. It is just I'm just generally just surprised because it's so good, and so I can only imagine now what the next year's gonna be in the next. Like that just gets
yeah.
me more excited to think, "Ooh, I would like to get wrong." So,
Yeah,
wow,
absolutely. Me too. And I can't wait to go down there and discuss alternate fermentations as well. Really dive deep into some custom coffees.
wow, that's actually very, very exciting. Yeah, and again, just for a geisha, I was just so happy with this coffee. Just more fruit forward than I would have assumed, and so just that paired with
Yeah,
the story, I'm just like, wow, all right. Like I will
yeah,
be on the lookout next year for from you to get more coffee from him. So,
yeah. I
oh,
felt the
very
same
excited.
way. I felt the same way.
I
super
love
fruit forward.
Yeah, yeah. So moving on to the main coffee that we used kind of for our exotic coffee, the Julio Madrid. I was trying to explain to one of our owners yesterday that this is probably it's the craziest coffee that we've probably had for the subscription yet. And he was
All
like,
right.
"Oh, cool." And so I was like, "Yeah, like this is like this will be wild." And he's like, "Okay," So
Yes.
when the coffee came in yesterday, he like popped into the cafe just to pick up his, and I was like, "You gotta you gotta have fun with this. You're gonna love it." And he was like, "I'm very excited." So yeah, kind of explain to just us how special this coffee is and who Julio Madrid is, because it's insane that we got a coffee from him through you to to have.
Yes. Yeah, like the other two coffees, like the relationship aspect is really important. And so we were connected with Julio from a team member of ours that we hired almost a year ago, I want to say. And he lived in Colombia, grew up in Colombia for a couple years. He was a coffee professor there, uh, had his own coffee shops, worked on coffee farms, just really immersed in the industry. He works for Cafe de Colombia still, which is the government entity that helps get out the coffees from Colombia. Everything goes through Cafe de Colombia. And overall, he's just like a stand-up individual. We've become like close friends, and we have a great relationship. And he introduced us to Julio. They were friends in Colombia, and so he sent us a bunch of samples to try last summer, and we just tasted a bunch of different wild coffees, and they're all natural culturing process, which I'll explain in a minute. And they they just were really explosive off the table, like every single one of them. There was like a few that were like weird in a way that like we didn't really know what to think about them, but uh they were just exceptionally explosive. And like I said, like you were saying, is they were one of the more crazy exotic options that we have, like in our offerings right now, or ever even. And this coffee's even more exceptional because it won third place in the World Barista Championship. It was blended with another coffee, but uh, when you taste this, it's such an intrusive coffee. Like you could put it, if you messed around with blending it, I don't know, but like you could just put a few beans in another cup and it almost takes over the entire cup. It's that explosive. So yeah, this is a Catura variety. Um, it has 184 hours of fermentation on it,
Mhm.
and it's fermented with custom yeasts and microbes that Julio used in a separate fermentation. So he fermented watermelons, or like watermelons in Colombia anyway, and harvested the cultures, so the yeast and microbes, bacterias, took those and then used it in the coffee fermentation. So it's not a co-ferment. There's no fruit that touched this, but it is an alternative yeast fermentation, you could say. And it had that effect on the coffee too. Crazy watermelon juice, very clean though, not super funky. Has a really nice freshness to it. We put cucumber on there, but others have said other really like fresh herbs as well. And yeah, it's just a really deep, complex coffee. Has milk chocolate body to it, so you get the low notes, but you also get all the highs and the mids too. The acidity is lively, energetic, long finish. You just have like watermelon Jolly Rancher candies like on your
Yeah.
palate for minutes afterwards. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah, I wrote down those three tasting notes, and then I wrote down also like pink lemonade and like champagne, because I was just like, this is
Yeah,
just ridiculous. Like this is
yeah.
so well. Go the first few times I had it when we tried it, it was just so I was so focused on like those just three notes on the tin that I was like, I love it. So tasting it this morning, I was like, there's more. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot going on with this
Oh
coffee.
yeah.
I was like,
It's hard to just like put the three lead notes because there's so many other things that you're like, oh yeah, I could say that too.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, explain a little bit to us kind of, I guess, about like yeasts and or microbes, because that's just such a big thing that's now becoming part of the industry. And people like me, to be honest, I've called you multiple times being like, explain this to me, because yeah, different people have been saying different things, and so it's been a journey even for me to learn about this. Yeah.
Yes, I'm so glad that you asked that because I've been wanting my little pedestal to stand on to talk about it. And you know, there's a lot of noise with anaerobics or co-ferments. They're almost these hot button issues in the industry right now, and they're causing a lot of shakeup, and for good reason because they're changing the way coffee tastes and probably forever. The industry is definitely going this direction, whether you like it or not, and yeah, it's gonna change things in maybe some bad ways for some producer and also in some really great cool ways for others. So I think there's an opportunity here, because yeast has such a major role in coffee, and all coffee's fermented. That's something that I think most people don't just like realize, especially the consumers. Like, all coffee's fermented. It's usually a short period of time, and it's usually just with the yeasts that are just available in the environment, to them. So they'll process the coffee, take it up to the top of the mountain for fermentation, leave it out in the open mountain air overnight, and then take it and continue processing. And it's a small, short thing, but really essential to the rest of the coffee processing. So when you take that idea and are like, okay, I could take different yeast strains. What yeast does is it targets compounds that are already within the coffee. It doesn't add or impart any flavor that's not already there. So you could have some a coffee that has like some nice citrus notes, but they're not as pronounced, and then use a specific yeast strain to target those citrus notes to amplify them. So unlike a co-ferment where you're actually putting in a fruit or an adjunct of some kind to influence the flavor, we're not doing that in this case. We're using yeast in biology to impact the flavor of the coffee, and it's a little bit more scientific than what I just explained. Even there's a lot of like research that is goes into this. Like the guys that are leading, like Julio Madrid, in this category. Finca Milan's like a world famous coffee farm. Like you could Google this guy and get tons of cool information of what he's doing.
Mhm.
And but I think maybe if you're super curious, you should go and check it out yourself. Like some
Mhm.
of these places, especially like Finca Milan, and I know like Edwin Norena is another really famous guy right now in this area. They host people all the time, show people what they're doing. They're excited about it as well. Like it's still very brand new sector, and I think the industry is trying to figure out how to place it. But it'll get shaken out at some point, and
Yeah.
but I think it's very cool. It's very intentionally done. It's not just an accident. Like, these are very curated copies.
Wow. Yeah, well, the first time I was introduced to Julio was probably, I think it was in January or December. We got the Daniel Ricci coffee that Daniel used to get second place in the World Barista Championship last year.
Yeah,
And it was roasted by Mame, and we had it on pour over, and just every person who bought it was just like, this is unreal. And
yeah,
and we were like, yeah, we know it's crazy. And yeah, we even had, I think, between 2 and, like, 4 bags of it. They were, like, $75 or something along those lines, and people bought them. People bought the
yeah.
bags, like, the tins, and it was like, wow. Like, people were just so excited that they just couldn't stop, they couldn't help it. Like, they were just like, I will spend the money for this coffee because of how good it is."
They're
And
addicting.
yeah, yeah, and so when I tasted yours, I was like, "Oh my gosh, this is like this is it.
Yes,
This is also like the same quality." It was just like, "This is insane." To be able to taste something from him again that was just like, just top of the line, crazy watermelon fruit forward, clean, complex, enjoyable, all of the above. And so it's like, especially now after you being like, wow, like this guy knows what he's doing, and
yeah,
couldn't be more excited to be able to have this coffee. Again, this is probably the craziest coffee that we've had in our subscription. Like, as far as I can remember, like I really do think it is. It's just, it's wild, and it's from an amazing producer, a crazy fermentation that's super fun, and just really unique and special. And through this process of just tasting this coffee that, like you mentioned, of the culturing and the yeast and everything, it's been such a wonderful learning journey for me, because I've had multiple people, who are either roasters or just work in the industry, they've been like, no, like that's basically a co-ferment. And it's so weird to like then talk to you and multiple other roasters who are like, no, actually, it's not. And there's actually a roaster here in St. Louis named Connor James, and he roasts for Quarrelsome Coffee, and
hmm,
he works very closely with his producers, probably more so in Costa Rica than other places, but also in like Guatemala and Colombia. And he has developed specific yeast strains to like with his producers for fun, kind of just like, hey, let's try this out, and so even one time he came in and I was like mentioning you, and he was like, "Yeah, like Adam's right. Like this is kind of how it works." And so it's very, I don't know, I get very excited when people in the industry from just different places are like, "No, yeah, like cool to hear that other people are doing a good job and kind of understand
yep,
what's going on, so to speak." And so that was neat to kind of be like, "Yeah, this guy named Adam from Reprise, he was explaining to me and kind of was like, yeah, like he gets it." Like, and so it's a neat thing to be able to now understand that a little bit better, and know like that this is a way to ferment coffee and get even more from it. And like you said, if the industry is moving in this like way, so to speak, and or toward this direction, that's kind of exciting to then see what else we'll get, and yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. To that point too, people are so quick to just dismiss something under one bucket and just be like, oh, it tastes like fruit, so it's a co-ferment or something. But it's like such a really like narrow-minded view, and there is definitely more that needs to be done in the coffee education side. That's where I'm really passionate, is coffee education, and I am trying to format my life, which is so hard, to cater to that in my community, so I could spend like almost all my time just educating the community, because I truly believe that like um the more educated the public is, the better choices that they're going to make. And that means for me, purchasing better coffee, more ethical coffee, giving producers more opportunity by be able to giving them more. And, that doesn't get to happen unless people understand and we're all kind of, we're drinking the same product here. But even with
yeah.
traditional processing methods like washed natural honey process, like that's still something that needs to get tackled too. So it's like, yeah, the industry is moving forward and getting even more complex, but people aren't learning anything as much to keep up with that. So, that's something that I would like to change personally.
Yeah, I love that. I feel, I mean, personally, again, I don't go to a lot of other cities, so to speak, to, see what other cafes and roasteries are doing. But the idea that you're focused on education is very exciting for me. That's something we're wanting to also get very good at. And so we're even kind of just on our own, kind of trying to take some time to learn a little bit more and to kind of know what we're talking about. And so it means a lot when we get crazy coffees like this in, and I get to explain to the staff, hey, this is a pretty cool coffee. Let me
Yeah.
explain why. So anytime that happens, I try to jump on it for the most part, and it's just too neat. Again, just so surprised at how complex and just wild this coffee is. I genuinely, when we got this coffee and we were tasting it, and then you and I were chatting, like, which ones do we use for the subscription? In my mind, while we were having that conversation, I was like, man, there really are like so many people who, when
Yeah.
they try this, are gonna be just like, they will be mind blown, and
Yeah.
some that also will be like, this is exactly what I wanted, and
Oh yeah.
and so,
Totally.
yeah, it was neat that you're like, yeah, like I tend to, let's give people this coffee. And I was like, man, you're right. Like, this is just, it's just a wild coffee. It's way too much fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Well, yeah. Well, moving on to the next one, Edwin Norena. I think this is also my first time again. I think having coffee from him. I don't think
Mm.
I've had coffee from him before, and if so, I don't remember. So, absolutely, amazing coffee, amazing producer. I know so little. Tell us a little bit about Edwin and how you came across him. Yeah.
Amazing guy. Like we got to spend some time with him when he was here in Chicago for SCA. He came by our cafe and did a cupping and spent like all day at the shop with him and his wife, and it was such a beautiful experience. And brought like 20 different coffees with him or something crazy, and we did a public cupping, and he was just like great to be around, magnetic personality. He is a guy that has a really crazy backstory too. He had some sort of terminal illness like years ago, and uh, it was looking like he wasn't going to make it. And he started doing all these different fermentation classes in Colombia, making different tinctures and things to try to heal himself, which eventually worked to some capacity because he's like no longer like dying, and took these concepts that he learned in fermentation and applied it to coffee. And so he started doing some really wild things, and the first time that i've I really had his coffee was a co-ferment, oddly enough, and it was co-fermented with Galaxy hops, which is like a beer hops. And that was a really cool coffee. Just got to try like a little bit of it, and that was it. And then a year goes by, and I hear of this guy uh, doing having like some crazy fermentation with Mosto, and I was like, okay, like I've had his coffee before, let's see what's up. And he won his coffee, won a gold medal for at the Golden Bean Coffee Roaster. It's the biggest roasting competition in North America, and his coffee won gold for espresso, and I got to taste it a few times. Our friends in Ohio roasted it, and so we bought some from him, and he was so like generous to share the contact for that. Purchasing coffee through him is interesting because he's actually very organized individual, and like he will unlike a lot of coffee producers, but he will contract certain lots with different importers, and so we can't buy certain things direct. We would have to go through an importer to get them, and so we ended up buying coffee through an importer, which is also unusual for us. And because it was so crazy. And the Cedra, which is what you guys have, that is also through this same group. Edwin just sent us a bunch of new samples that we could buy direct that aren't contracted. So the relationship is still working itself out. Like we've only been working with him for like a year now, so pretty new relationship. And he does some great things in Colombia in his area because he's learned so much about fermentation and had such a positive reaction. He helps other farmers in the area. He consults on their farm, will tell them which varieties are good for what processing, and then either buy cherry or buy parchment, and then he sells it under his umbrella, which is Finca Campos Hermoso. And it's pretty cool. Like, a lot of people, a lot of producers that are struggling to come to market, he's able to help through just his knowledge of fermentation. It's pretty amazing. So um, I like working with him because I like what he's doing, and anybody that's an innovator changes, tries to change things for the better. He shakes things up, and his coffees are, man, they're really hard to compare with anything else. Like, they're just on a whole other level. And so the black honey process that you guys have, that is just a traditional processing method. He does do regular coffees as well, but you wouldn't expect it. Like, it's so explosive and in your face that it's like, this has got to be an anaerobic of some kind. But to break down like the assumptions in coffee, you can't just assume processing or things that are co-ferment, or assume assumptions are pretty bad. Like, I think digging into it and finding finding out the truth and finding out the core, like, is so important. It actually makes that coffee more special when you taste it and you're like, oh, this is actually just a honey process. That's really, really wild. You get some really complex notes from it that I haven't tasted in a whole lot of other coffees.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's absolutely wild. And like you said, when we tasted it, we were surprised. We were surprised that it was not a co-ferment of some sort or anything. I have it right here, and it's just like still wild. And I think I wrote down my tasting notes, like same thing as you, and then I like threw in there like almost like a blueberry sweetness.
Yeah,
And like an orchid floral just on the end, just like purple florals, just
yeah,
so enjoyable. Just way too much fun, and just genuinely surprised by this. Also, anytime I can get a coffee that has lavender in it, I
yeah.
I think it's quite special. And
So
so
unique.
exactly. Yeah, and to have a Cedra too is super exciting. I don't know too much about the variety. If I remember correctly, it's kind of one that was growing wildly in Colombia and
It's a
found
Bourbon. It's a Bourbon variant.
a Bourbon variant. Okay, I was way off.
So it's Bourbon and Typica, I want to say, or something like that.
Sure.
I forget off the top of my head, but there's
Oh,
so many different variations to Bourbon. The Cedra is one though.
okay, yeah. Well, it is so tasty, and also explain real quick what a black honey process is for people who are like, I know what a honey process is, but what does the black mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's just different levels of color for honey process. And for those of you that don't know, a honey process is like a cross between washed and natural. It's a way to produce coffee using less water. And a lot of producers embrace that because of the less water aspect. You don't have access to water, or have limited access to water. The honey process is a really solid option. And so the colors represent more or less how much sugar the cherries or the bean remains on. So when they're doing the sun drying uh, on the raised beds, the darker the color, so black would be the most mucilage and sugars dried onto it, whereas like a red or yellow would be less of that. So more time in the sun, more closer to a natural process, which will mean more of a fruitier coffee.
Yeah.
So the black honey is like a fruit, more on the fruitier side of the honey process.
Yeah, yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like um, the honey process itself was kind of something that came out of Las Lajas in Costa Rica, or
Yeah,
you know, wonderful. Yeah, and we randomly right now have a Las Lajas actually, which is kind of fun, and it's actually not a black honey, which is even funnier. But yeah, they've done so much good stuff, and so it's kind of neat to get variations of the honey process every once in a while because it's unique. And
yeah,
I even think this year was one of the first times that we carried a coffee that was a red honey process, and so it was like just interesting to note. And that was kind of one of the first times where our baristas were like, wait, explain. And so it's kind of nice to
yeah.
like, oh yeah, yeah, this is kind of what's a little different. Yeah, yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
And
Well,
I've had some red honey process that are sweeter or like, more complex than black. So it's like, I think it's more of just a descriptor indicator of the processing and
mhm,
that more than anything. But
mhm, yeah, yeah. Well, in terms of, so we're kind of at a point, our cafe, where our staff also is not like the biggest fan, so to speak, of co-ferments. In terms of co-ferments, what is not like your take, so to speak, but like for I guess I should start with this. So, for example, a couple weeks ago, we had a cupping and one of our customers who's a really great guy, and his name's Thomas Kurt. Shout out to Thomas. He he brought in like a watermelon co-ferment from like a different roastery, and to be honest, I don't remember what roastery it was from, but we tasted it on the table, and it was really, to be honest, so good. It was
yeah,
it well the thing that surprised me about this one in particular was that it was not overbearing. It was like a co-ferment you could drink every day, if that makes sense.
sure.
So even though, we're not the biggest fans of it, and we try to not carry coffees that are co-fermented, um, as a whole, what are your thoughts on co-ferments, and I don't know how the industry, so to speak, should look at them, because I feel like this has kind of become somewhat of a hot topic as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I know that baristas as a whole generally don't like them for some reason, but it's like this whole thing. But
Yeah.
for me, I'm a huge fan of Coffee Quality Institute, like where I got my Q certification from. I love a lot of stuff that they do. And I tend to focus on what people are doing right to move the industry forward instead of what they're doing wrong. A lot of there's always going to be opportunity, but I want to focus on what is our end result, how are we trying to get there. It's a much more positive path forward. And so what their main mantra, or one of their main mantras, is a sold copy is better than an unsold copy. And it has to relate to how the coffee industry is relates to people, because like, yeah, it's coffee for us, it's just a product or whatever, but like we have to think of who we're impacting when we're drinking coffee. And that's a huge part of specialty coffee is the coffee farmers, right? And equity in the industry, because there's so much money in the coffee industry. It's sickening that coffee farmers are super poor. If you think about it, they should be rich, like some of the richest people. But it is what it is. So um, they mainly say that as like, when you're talking about borderline specialty coffees, to be specialty, it has to score 80 points or above. And your 80 points is not very good coffee. And under that is really not very good coffee. And so when you're scoring coffee and it's a 79-point coffee, it would be advantageous to the industry to move that to an 80 in most cases, because your score sheet is not just an opinion. It is a government document that travels with the coffee through its export life. And so it would drastically change, or can change, a farmer's life getting that 80-point certification versus a 79.
Mm,
And so I think the same thing is like with co-ferments, that like it depends on what you want, depends on what your customers want. Like co-ferments aren't evil. Like, do people drastically, like, I don't know, it people hype everything. It's so crazy. It's like, I don't know why things have to be so extreme all the time. Like in coffee, there is a coffee for everybody. Not everybody's going to be into specialty. And that's okay. They're not, evil or less than or whatever. Like, and the people that like co-ferments, that's cool. If that's what you're into, I think realizing the processing is good as long as you know what you're drinking. It's like, I love watermelon. Like, absolutely. Like, I'd be down for a watermelon co-ferment. Like, am I gonna drink that all the time? Absolutely not. But I think there is a time and a place for it, you
Yep.
know? And it just depends on what you want to accomplish and what you want to showcase to your customers, because we try to intentionally choose coffees that are going to spark the conversation of education. Why is this like this? Like, I want people to ask the question. And so if the coffee achieves that, then wonderful. Like, I think that's where we want to be, is, a curious consumer. At least in our community, that's what we're trying to go for.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's kind of neat that you brought that up in terms of there's a coffee for everyone. Mame that we, carry, their mantra is, the coffee what is it? The coffee you like is like the best coffee or something. Wow, I should know this.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
No, I've heard that before. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And that paired with we recently so last month for our subscription we had H&S coffee out of Laramie, Wyoming, and Coulter Sunderman, he has stickers. Like his main sticker for H&S is actually it's like oh, it's so funny. I love it. It's this like shiny sticker that just says boring washed Katura. And it's so funny. Yeah, and that as well as paired with we carry September, and September, Kyle every once in a while, every time he releases a washed Katura, he's like, and here's another good one. You need to get it. Like,
Yes.
and so it's very neat that I feel like we've been working with wonderful people who I don't know, have very good relationships with the producers and are very just happy and open to be talking about everything in the industry, whether it's a co-ferment or whether it's a boring wash Katura. There is a coffee for everyone, like you said. And
Yeah.
it's really neat to have these coffees, for, this month's subscription because I don't think we've had a coffee like these, so to speak. And it's just very exciting to be able to kind of talk a little bit more about this. I mean, like I said, we're not big into co-ferments, but even probably 2 or 3 weeks ago, I was cupping some coffees at some coffee roasters here in St. Louis, and
Yeah.
to be honest, I tried a co-ferment, and it tasted like like straight bubble gum, and I
Yeah.
honestly was like, I think I'm gonna give in. Like, I think this
Yeah.
is like like it
Everyone
was
has their breaking point. Yeah.
they do, and I tasted it, and I was just like, "This," like, I was like, "I want people to try this." Like,
Yeah.
just the
Like,
taste. Yeah, yeah,
at some point, why are you trying to resist something that you like? It's just like,
yeah, yeah. No, it
yeah.
was absolutely wild, and so I think I'm in a way trying to also break out of my shell of being like, this can't always be the case so much as like I don't know. I'm just being more, at least trying to be more realistic and enjoying what I'm tasting. And
Yeah.
yeah,
It seems people are afraid of co-ferments and anaerobics, like they're gonna make wash coffees just like obsolete, which I don't think is the case at all. Like, that doesn't need to be a fear, you know.
mhm, yeah,
But
yeah,
I see it like, just coffee is great. That's why we're all here anyway. So
yeah, yeah. I love it. Well, so you've been in the industry for a while, and it's wonderful to chat with someone who as far as I can tell, you've got lovely relationships, with people you work with all across the industry. When you look at where the industry is right now, what's the thing that you not so much like get not like fed up with, but you want people to know more about it. What would you say that's like the culture in the yeast fermentations, or are there other things that you're like, what, I kind of wish cafes like us and other people would I don't know a little bit more and or embrace a specific thing about the industry.
yes, man, that's a loaded question, because I think I used to be a victim to like getting upset over things like more than I am now. Now I'm just like, all right, if what I have to do every day is just talk to people about coffee, try coffee with them, and like tell them what I know, maybe that is enough. You know, it's just like I am not gonna be able to change things overnight the way that I want. And so, you just start copy education. And like I guess one of the opportunities that I see here in our community in Chicagoland and pretty much everywhere when I travel to, not everywhere, but a lot of places, is I wish we were able to connect with other coffee companies and roasters in our area in a more proactive way. Like we're, you know, not friends, we're not necessarily enemies, but like everybody's standoffish of each other in a weird way for the most part. But like, there could be we could be a coalition, you know what I mean? Like we
Yeah.
could all work for the same things. And I don't know if everybody in our area necessarily wants that or is even aware of that, or if there is a common goal between all of the coffee shops in the area. There might not be. But that's why I'm like, I can't get upset over, we're products of our environment in a way, and I need to change our environment to be more focused on coffee education if I want to see the changes that I want to see. So
Mm.
um
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard to I used to get upset all the time because like when I first opened, people were like, why did you open a coffee shop here if there's a McDonald's across the street? It was like that's a huge gap in like
Yeah. Yeah.
man, I'm like, man, how am I gonna start telling people that coffee is the seed of a fruit? Like
Yeah,
they're
we're
not gonna believe me.
they won't. Not at all. Not if you're across them from a McDonald's. That's right.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
dying.
the industry is moving that way. Even if we don't necessarily see it all the time, if I don't see it all the time, but it slowly is getting there. It's better than it was 10 years ago. Like people actually know what natural processed coffee is now.
Yeah.
So that's cool.
Yeah. That is cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad about that. Well, now then looking at the industry, what are you just most excited about and most happy about?
Man, that's hard. I love that it's like the past few years, it's felt like because when you do something for a long time and you're a participant in it, we're not just like in our own little box. Like we try to do all the things like SCA, Golden Bean, different local roasting competitions that just started popping up and networking events. It's like we're trying to yeah, yeah, I don't know. It's like what I'm most excited about is that all those pieces have fallen into place to where it's like now it's our community and we're building those relationships off of that
Mhm.
is super cool. It's cool to be a part of it, instead of just like, oh yeah, I'm a coffee roaster too. It's like, no, we're a part of this like bigger moving piece. That's always been really exciting because through just being in coffee and all of the stuff. I've met people like yourself where we have very like-minded views on the industry, and that's encouraging because most of my day is spent talking to people that don't have that same view, whether it's because they most people don't disagree with it, most people just don't know. It's like I spend every day in coffee. Of course, like it's something on the top of my thoughts always, but
Mhm.
yeah, being a part of that big network that people are like-minded, that's really awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's actually a very exciting thing. And even here in St. Louis, just within this last year we hosted a latte art throwdown. This Friday we're hosting another latte art throwdown, and it's
Cool.
just fun that other baristas would even show up. The other
Right, right.
roasters and companies would like want to help
Yeah.
support it. And I know it's like even that's like such a small thing, but it gets me hyped because I see people from these roasteries and shops that like I look up to, that I know they know so much more than me and they've been in the industry forever. And the fact that they would just happily show up and just have a good time in like, I don't know, that's like so
Yeah.
encouraging to me. And it's so uplifting to be like, wow, like, we have such wonderful people who just are here to just have a good time and to, I don't know, just share their knowledge. And it just is just the neatest thing, to be honest, to be able to be a part of
Yeah.
a coffee community where people just come together just because they want to and because they want to learn and want to just be together. And so I don't know, that's kind of cool that you mentioned that, because even as time has gone on, it's been very fun chatting with all the roasters that we get to chat with, and so many, like you said, like-minded individuals that I kind of didn't know existed, so to speak. And it's
Yeah,
just it's really neat, and it's
it lights the fire, keeps the passion alive, and
yeah, yeah.
it's great.
Very, very much so, very much so. Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest, this kind of wraps up everything I kind of wanted to, talk about. Just, I had way too much fun during this conversation. I could probably talk for, for a while more, which I know
we
you and
both
I
we
will
both
definitely
could.
have more conversations.
Yeah,
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 for sure.
yeah. Well, is there anything else you just wanted to add, before we hop off, or anything else?
No, I think I've probably talked too much, but I appreciate your time, and thank you so much for having me, and thanks for loving our coffees too. That's super cool. And we're
Yeah.
so glad to connect.
Oh yeah, same. I'm very excited. I don't know if, I mean, I think we've chatted a wee bit, but I'm already looking at next year, and even when we can get you down to St. Louis to do a takeover.
Oh,
And
amazing. Let's
oh
go.
yeah, I'm very, very excited. And so, like, everyone who gets to try your coffee for this month, they're gonna be, I'm assuming, pretty stoked when when
Yeah,
we get to have you in the cafe and just
lots of time
drinking
to hype
along.
it up.
Yeah, let's go. Well, again, thanks so much for your time, Adam. This was amazing. Yeah.
Thanks, David.
Yeah. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll chat soon.
Later, dude. Peace.
Yeah. Bye.